So what do we do? I need some kind of guidance to take away from all this. Put your finger on it so I can tie it in a bow. Please?
The Simpsons has been on the air for over 30 years, and throughout its run there have been some lofty highs and cavernous lows. I recently went over the polarizing Family Guy episode, Brian and Stewie. In that video, I went over how Family Guy has hit a wall in the last 6 years, with none of its episodes reaching above a 7 out of 10 on IMDb. The Simpsons hit a similar wall in 2015. The show's 27th season would mark the start of a 6-year drought in IMDb ratings above 8 for a single episode. And it would also mark the release of one of the strangest Simpsons episodes I've ever seen. Season 27 of The Simpsons premiered with the episode Every Man's Dream, an episode that focuses on Marge leaving Homer. Funnily enough, this was one of the first episodes of The Simpsons I ever remember seeing, and it's definitely one that stuck in my head, but for all the wrong reasons. Every Man's Dream is a gigantic pile of garbage, and in this video today, I'm going to explain why. My name's Mr. Cow, let's get this underway. Fans and casual viewers of The Simpsons alike have often joked that Marge would have left Homer after just a few of his wacky schemes and outings. With The Simpsons having more than 700 episodes at the time of making this video, it makes sense that the family dynamic set up over 30 years ago would grow a little stale. Having an episode centered around the Simpsons family dynamic finally breaking down doesn't actually sound like a bad idea on paper to me, but Every Man's Dream fails to reach the point where it becomes interesting, engaging, emotional, or in any way impactful throughout the entire episode. All of these shortcomings can be summed up with one word that has recently been synonymous with The Simpsons: complacency. The Simpsons was a show that had a lot to prove when it originally aired in 1989. The world of adult animation as we know it today was far different in the early 90s. Shows like The Flintstones and The Jetsons were the closest thing to The Simpsons when it came to animation on television aimed at an older audience. The early success of The Simpsons paved the way for the world of adult animated television that we know today. And as it turns out, paving the way for the next generation of adult animated television is incredibly tiring. By the turn of the millennium, The Simpsons had already been on the air for 10 years, and regardless of how talented the staff is working on the show, that's a really long time to explore this world and these characters. Looking back at this graph of IMDb rankings, we can see that The Simpsons really started to slide in its 9th and 10th seasons. The show wasn't becoming worse per se, but it was becoming tired, and as the years ticked on, the show only grew more and more exhausted until finally we reach 2015. The writers behind The Simpsons decided it was time to experiment with an entirely new dynamic. A dynamic that would see the show's 27th season starting off with Marge and Homer separating. The Simpsons had dealt with the tension between Marge and Homer's marriage various times before this episode. Most notably in the show's first season with the episode Life on the Fast Lane, which saw Marge tempted by an outside romantic force, and in the third season with the episode Colonel Homer, which saw Homer tempted by an outside romantic force. But The Simpsons going as far as actually having Homer and Marge separate was a fairly fresh and new idea. I say fairly because there's been 700 episodes, so there's some overlap in some areas with other episodes. But would this 27th season of The Simpsons be different? Would it introduce a divorced family dynamic? Would the show explore the single dating lives of these older characters for an entire season? The answer to all three of these questions is sadly no, although it definitely would have been more interesting. Instead, what we get is a ham-fisted marketing stunt that further cements the complacency of The Simpsons. Homer falls asleep on the job like usual, but this time he gets injured and is sent off to the hospital where he is diagnosed with narcolepsy. Homer then uses his narcolepsy diagnosis as an excuse to get out of helping out around the house. And after failing to get his prescription that would help him with his newly diagnosed condition, Marge decides to seek marriage counseling with Homer. Marge explains how they have been to every marriage counselor in Springfield and nothing has worked. She is then advised by the counselor to leave Homer.
The only way you and Homer will ever be happy is to spend a little time apart, followed by more time apart, followed by a divorce.
Which she promptly does, kicking off the main story of the episode. Now, usually I'd continue breaking down the episode from here, but Every Man's Dream is no ordinary episode of a TV show, so I'm gonna move things along pretty quickly for reasons that will become clear shortly. So, after being separated for a little while, Homer falls for the pharmacist that gives him his narcolepsy medication. They carry on with a relationship, they have a drug trip, and things seem to be going pretty well, until Homer goes to dinner with his new girlfriend's father, who is now dating Marge. Homer's girlfriend's dad proposes to Marge, and bam! Homer wakes up back in counseling. Apparently, it was all a dream, and Homer realizes he needs to be a better husband and father. So he commits himself to a new lifestyle in accordance with Marge's wishes. Homer has finally gotten his family back, and he's a better man now thanks to the terrible nightmare he had. But then, bam! Homer wakes up in a bar with his new girlfriend. Realizing now that Marge is in fact engaged and leaving him, Homer runs to Marge to try and win her back, but he's too late. But then, and you're not going to believe this next part, I swear to God, you're not going to believe this next part, bam! Marge wakes up this time, and it's revealed that this whole situation centered around Homer was actually her dream. And then the episode ends with no resolution, no emotional moments, no actual consequences, and absolutely no change to the Simpsons family dynamic.
I need some kind of guidance to take away from all this, please.
Well, one thing we therapists can give is concise, simple solutions. And yours is...
Hannah, what does that one mean?
It means don't get drunk in Brooklyn.
Now, I know that was kind of a lot really quickly, but the important thing to remember is 90% of the story in this episode doesn't matter. And I know what you're thinking. Wow, this episode seems like a complete waste of time that only exists to drum up buzz around the premiere of the 27th season of The Simpsons, and doesn't actually tell a story that has any meaning or purpose behind it other than to waste the audience's time and hurt the already battered reputation of The Simpsons post-1999. To those of you with that sentiment, I am right there with you. This episode is such a massive waste of time that it's actually insulting. Instead of trying to do anything meaningful, like set up a new family dynamic for The Simpsons, or emotional, like rekindling Homer and Marge's relationship, the episode just sort of happens. That's the best way to describe Every Man's Dream. It's a series of events that have no impact on any of the characters, and everyone is the exact same as they were at the beginning of the episode by the end. No one learns anything, no one accomplishes anything, the episode just happens, and then it ends. Now, I've always found it difficult to get invested in stories that have the broad ending of, it was all a dream, though I make exceptions for episodes that teach their characters a valuable lesson by the end of whatever dream sequence is taking place, like in the BoJack Horseman episode Downer ending. The events of the episode don't have to be canon, so long as the characters grow and interact in satisfying ways. But in this episode, it just feels like the writers changed their formula too much and decided to hit the reset button when they didn't like how things played out. This is easily one of the worst written episodes of a show that I've seen in a long time, because it fails to give the audience any reason to care by the end of the episode. Every man's dream has no substance to it. It has no real consequences, and it purposefully doesn't give the audience any kind of answer or resolution. This episode ends on a meta joke about how the episode doesn't really have an ending, and it falls completely flat for me. This wasn't a blatantly meta episode before this joke at the end, other than the fact that it was an episode with a premise that is often joked about by Simpsons fans. There really is no indication that this is a meta episode to a casual viewer, or really just your average audience member that maybe hasn't seen all the 26 seasons of The Simpsons before this point. So either it was a joke about Simpsons fans who wanted this episode, or it was just a cheap way to end an even cheaper episode. Regardless of what the intentions behind the ending were, I don't think either explanation changes the fact that this episode as a whole is just a waste of time. From start to finish, this episode is just a swing and a miss in the writing department for me. The only silver linings of this episode would be a few good jokes at the beginning and a fun drug trip sequence towards the middle. Other than that, I have nothing nice to say about this horrible waste of time. Every Man's Dream is a perfect example of what's wrong with modern Simpsons, and what complacency can do to a TV show. The Simpsons feels like it lacks any purpose to exist in the 21st century. Before 2000, the show existed to entertain people in a new way for the new decade of the 90s, but now it feels like it exists just to exist. Sure, a lot of people still tune into new episodes of The Simpsons, but ask any fan of the show what their favorite season is, and I'm certain it won't be one from the 21st century. The Simpsons, frankly, doesn't need to exist anymore, and this episode is a perfect example as to why. People are too familiar with The Simpsons. If the show were to actually make a change and separate Marge and Homer, many people would feel that it wasn't the same show anymore. In fact, if the show were to make any changes to the Simpsons family itself, it wouldn't feel like the same show anymore. When TV shows lose their ability to change their core dynamics any further, or they can't find an interesting way to explore their current dynamic, that's a good sign that the show should probably end. Every Man's Dream is easily one of the worst episodes of The Simpsons I've ever seen, because it made me realize that there isn't anywhere left to go for these characters. They exist in permanent limbo, being kept alive on life support. New ideas seemingly can't exist within the world of The Simpsons anymore. So instead, the show just keeps retreading the same ground with looser and looser plots to hold the whole thing together. And keep in mind, this episode is from 2015. And The Simpsons is still going on today. If this is how tired the show felt 8 years ago, God only knows what kind of slog the rest of these newer seasons of The Simpsons have to offer. If writers and showrunners are complacent and content to carry on the same tired dynamics and stories that have been told for the last 30 years, it can lead to stories that have no meaning, no emotion, and really no purpose to exist. And I can say with full confidence that Every Man's Dream is one of these such episodes that really does have no purpose to exist. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'm going to keep this last part brief because my voice is very sore, but I need to say thank you to everyone who showed up to my inside job video from 2 weeks ago. That video has gone on to be the most successful thing on this entire channel. It's sitting at over 400,000 views, which is mind-boggling because that's twice as much as the next most successful video on this channel. So it's a lot to take in, but I am very, very grateful for everyone that showed up, so thank you. I also had a lot of fun putting that video together. Everything from the thumbnail to the picking out the music to actually constructing it and pacing it out. It was just a great time, and frankly, these last 3 months on the channel have been a great time. I've loved just about every single video I've put together, which isn't something I always feel. Sometimes I'll wrap up a project and hate whatever I just finished. Not so recently. So it's great that I've been able to do that, and it's even better that people are connecting with it, responding to it, engaging with it, and talking about it. So thank you all for that. It means the world that I get to do something like this, and I'm going to keep on doing it. So there's all that. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to become a cow, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.